Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, fellow Finex. This is Dick Dubalada, your MC for today. And this is Global Leadership at its Best. It's still part of the celebration of the Women's International Women's Month. And I was reading a while ago the roster of speakers that we have, and I would like to tweak the title a little bit of this webinar or of this session. I would like to say, instead of global leadership at its best, I'd like to say global women leaders at its best. So may I now call on our liaison director, Tiffy Zulueta, to lead us in the opening prayer, to be followed by the national anthem.
May I now request everyone to join me in prayer? Father God, all glory, honor, and blessing, all power and might, all praise and thanksgiving be to you, Abba, Father, to us all. We stand on your word declaring that when we call upon you, you will answer us and be with us in distress. Our deliverer and healer, we seek your protection for our families and all of us, from the scourge of COVID-19 and all manner of disease and affliction. We pray especially for our health workers who tirelessly perform their duties at great risk to themselves. We pray for all of us co-workers in the business community that we may perform our tasks with greater diligence in these difficult times, to serve each other in our country in solidarity and spirit of social responsibility. We pray for all those in authority and government and the private sector, that they may have all wisdom, competence, and strength to lead us and serve through this period of crisis, with special attention to our poor and disadvantaged brethren who are struggling to survive. We pray for reconciliation and peace among all Filipinos as we come to better realize our oneness as people, in good times and bad, as a common thread unites us. So in acknowledgement of our dependence on you, and in obedience, we approach you, Father God, humble ourselves and pray, seek your presence and turn from our evil ways, that you may listen from heaven, forgive our sins, and revive our land. In the loving name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much, Tiffy. Now, may I call on Terry Magleo. Terry Magleo is the chairperson of the Women in Finance Committee in Phoenix. Terry, please.
Hi, thank you, past President Dick, for that kind introduction. Dick is my role model in every way. She founded the Women in Finance. She founded the Women in Finance Committee during her term as president. She's a tax expert. She's an advisor to the government, a businesswoman, a painter, a farmer, and a zooer. She sews all her dresses, and she's very charitable. My Phoenix colleagues, guests, all participants, local and international, an amazing morning to all of us. Special welcome to our friends from the United States and student leaders from the Junior Phoenix. happy Women's International Month to all of you ladies and to the gentlemen out there, to your spouses, to your significant others, our moms, our daughters. I'm Terry Magleo, chairperson of the Women in Finance Committee. This body, proudly one of the pillars of Phoenix, is composed of 57 strong-willed, driven chief executive officers and chief finance officers from across the industries in banking, fintech, tax and audit, legal, manufacturing, and consultancy services. It helps provide a platform for programs that support the development and upliftment of women's lives irrespective of strata. I'm pleased to share with everyone that just last Christmas, my colleagues and yours truly were able to distribute 27 trikes for business women entrepreneurs from Tondo, Manila. Our women entrepreneurs will be selling food, vegetables, meat, fish, mineral water, and gasol in their neighboring areas. Most of the beneficiaries are widows of extrajudicial killing in Tondo, notably one of the poorest areas in the country. Interestingly, other widows were taught stage acting lessons from PETA. This is Philippine Educational Theater Association, coached by PETA in their acting workshops. They had also held shows at Don Bosco Auditorium and displayed superb acting, an spectator friend exclaimed. Another project we had was sending some enterprising women to train at Connected Women's online training courses. This is good for women to earn extra income while working from home online even prior to pandemic. We try to promote women's sense of self-worth, their ability to determine their own choices, and their right to influence social changes for themselves and others. It's all about equipping and allowing women to make life-determining decisions through different challenges in society with great scrutiny. What a better way to celebrate more meaningfully and with more relevance the International Women's Month than having the privilege to hear the beautiful and astonishing stories from our selected set of speakers as we participate in today's webinar that serves as the opening salvo for 2021 with Phoenix team transcending the new frontier, leading beyond recovery. The life testimonies of these astonishing ladies exemplify the true meaning of women empowerment and remarkably showcased their global leadership talents at their best. Their personal accounts of persistence and global leadership qualities will later inspire us to, how like them, will rise above the rest. Doubtlessly, their constituents, stakeholders, and the overall communities they serve benefited from this success. As finance professionals, we hope to learn from Ms. Angeline Tam of Angkas on how her leadership skills evolved during the pandemic. We're also eager to know how the Honorable Jocelyn Manalo, Mayor of Daly City from California, faced the challenges in serving our Filipino constituents in times of COVID crisis. And of course, we are motivated to listen to Ms. Isabel Rivera, a shining star at the United Nations, on how the current initiatives of United Nations in Southeast Asia and Philippines help address this pandemic. Before we proceed any further, allow me to take this opportunity to thank Phoenix President, Attorney Francis Lim, the program participants of the Women in Finance Committee, past President Dick, Moderator par excellence Malu, our liaison director Tiffy, our ever resourceful secretariat, Jam, Mike, Lynn, Rafi, Alex, Jeff, and of course my cousin Estelle for inviting Mayor Jocelyn for putting all this endeavor together. We'd like also to express our deepest appreciation to our global leaders who will be properly introduced in a while for generously lending their very precious time to be with us this morning. As we start the year 2021 with great optimism and hope, let us together be inspired by our global leaders and move forward to rise beyond recovery for the sake of our family, for our country, and for God's greater glory. I wish everyone a blissful day and please expect an exciting event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. May I say that you would notice we are all in blue. This is the official color of Women in Finance. And I hope our other women in finance ladies out there are also wearing blue today. So we are now on the main part of the session of the program. And before that, I'd like to announce that you can post your questions and answers in the Q&A box, and I will pick it up from there later on. Okay. I will now introduce our three women leaders, women global leaders at their best, and I am proud to say that they all have connections with the Filipino blood, either by affinity or by consanguinity. Let me start with our first speaker, Angeline Tham, who is the founder and CEO of Angkas. Of course, we all know what Angkas is. Angkas is the leading motorcycle ride-hailing platform in the Philippines and is available in Manila, also in Cebu, and in Cagayan de Oro. The app has onboarded over 20,000 bikers and has been downloaded over 1 million times. Actually, my son used Angkas. Before Angkas, Angeline headed the two wheels of Grab and conducted market studies, conceptualized and successfully launched the Grab Express and Grab Bike Philippines business in the Philippines. She was also the vice president of SoftBank China and India Holdings, e-commerce consultant at International Athletic Trading Company. Angeline also co-founded the Soldiers, that built and launched the premium e-commerce site based on the pay-to-bid model in Singapore, Malaysia, and the Philippines. She was an associate at JP Morgan for 5 years after graduating at New York University, Leonard N. Stern School of Business. Angeline will be followed by another lady at its best, Ms. Jocelyn Manalo. Jocelyn is half Filipino, half American mayor of Daly City, California, USA. Jocelyn Manalo was raised in Daly City and has deep roots in serving the community from a young age. Being raised in the multi-ethnic city of Daly City has given Jocelyn a deep appreciation for diversity. Jocelyn is a true advocate for social equity. She is raising her son, 2-year-old son, Ethan, and her 2-month-old daughter, Giselle, with her husband, Elle. Early in her career, she became a community service worker, providing direct service to the Filipino World War II veterans. Jocelyn also managed the Bill Soro Housing Program, a program that helped low and moderate income families find, defend, and sustain their housing. Currently, she is a community engagement manager, building partnership to create community development opportunities, such as affordable housing, jobs, open space, and youth development. She was an appointed personnel board commissioner for the city of Daly City, was previously chairwoman for the Samtrans Citizen Advisory Committee, ensuring that local community voice is represented. She is also on the board of Senior and Disability Action, an organization that fights for policy locally and on state level. She earned her Master's of Public Administration from San Francisco State University School of Public Affairs and Civic Engagement. She has also attained a Bachelor's of Arts in Asian American Studies and a minor in Women's Studies from San Francisco State University. In 2016, she was elected as the first Filipina Asian American woman to the City Council and appointed vice mayor immediately, eventually becoming mayor in 2018 and again in 2021 for the city of Daly City. Last but not the least, we have Miss Isobel. It's not Isabel, it's Isobel, Isobel, Isobel Rivera, a full-blooded Filipina born in the Philippines. She is the regional head of partnerships and resource mobilization for UN women in Asia and the Pacific. She leads on UN Women's strategic partnerships with bilateral and non-bilateral partners, including engagement with the private sector. Her portfolio also includes regional advocacy and communications. Isobel brings over 15 years of international experience in strategy development, private sector fundraising, and resource mobilization. Prior to UN Women, Isobel worked in a variety of roles at UNICEF and held different leadership roles in international development organizations and hospital foundations. Isobel is a Filipino Canadian from Toronto, Canada. She obtained her BA from McGill University and her MBA from HEC Paris. Isobel enjoys yoga, like me, leisurely bike rides, art museums, and discovering new places with her husband and young daughter. Okay, each speaker will be given 20 minutes for their presentation. Questions, please put your questions in the Q&A and I will take it from there. All right, let me now call on Ms. Angelinta as the first presenter.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. It's Happy Women's Month, and thank you for the introduction. So I'd like to kind of share a little bit of our story of Angkas, what we've been through, and why we do what we do, right? And lastly, why it is more fun in the Philippines. So let's go to the presentation. So really, what I want to talk about is leadership through crisis, right? Because we've been through quite a bit. So next slide. So to begin with, I just like to share a little bit about disruption and disruptive innovation, right? It's something that you disrupt the way things are done, you disrupt the way companies are used to doing things, and normally is met with a lot of resistance. As you've seen of these companies here, Apple, for the way we use our cell phones, right? It used to be the BlackBerry, depending on how old the audience is here. And that was unthinkable to get rid of the keypad before. Netflix, for the way that we consume entertainment, right? I mean, they started off as a mail-in DVD company, and they've evolved, and at that time people said they wouldn't survive, and they almost didn't, right? But today Netflix is a key part of our lives, right? Especially with the lockdowns and whatnot. And lastly, Uber. Uber, for the way that we think about moving ourselves from one place to another. It was unthinkable before to get into a car with a stranger, right? But that's something that they've managed to make a reality, and that's one of the reasons why Angkas is around, right? So these are companies, though, that we've seen the transition, we've seen the disruption. But what about things that that have happened in the last 100 years, for example, that we don't even think about anymore, right? So this is an example of an ad that John D. Rockefeller used to run, the richest man in the world. He made his money on kerosene lamps and was trying to keep kerosene lamps in your houses because it was safer than electricity, right? I mean, go figure. And this is a story about Henry Ford, right, the modern founder of cars. So when he tried to go get a loan, the president of the bank said, "Hey, horses are here to stay, right? There's no way that this hobby of yours is gonna succeed. Good thing." So he persevered, though, right? So, and even when he found success, right, he was still being vilified in the press of killing children and being called the devil's wagon. But we know that he was extremely successful, because you can see from this picture here, EDSA doesn't look like this anymore, but in the past, right, and hopefully, and when things come back, right, we were facing a problem of congestion, traffic, right? And the JICA study actually said that, in 2018, every single day, the congestion in this one road was causing 3.5 billion pesos worth of losses. And, that's crazy, right? Just because of this one road and the congestion that we had. And that's why we started Angkas, because I wanted to give time and power back to people to be able to go through traffic and not, think about their lives chained to traffic, right? The schools that you go to, they send your kids to, the work that you do, the friends that you make, all of that is surrounded by, all your decisions are kind of like tied to traffic congestion, but you don't even think about it, right? So when we launched, we were really well loved, right? So on social media, people were saying, wow, I didn't think I'd like it, but, thank you. But of course, our regulators, they're also very forward. So they sent us a cease and desist order on Twitter, right? I didn't know they could do that, and my lawyers say they can't, but they did anyway. So don't say the government's behind the times. So one fine day, they came to our office, they raided our office, they shut it down, and we thought that we could have this opportunity to share what we were doing, right? What we were doing was professionalizing an existing service, Habal, right? We were professionalizing it. We were making sure they had driver's licenses, professional driver's licenses, training, insurance, no heckling on the prices. And our drivers were making good money. Our customers were really happy. And we wanted to share this with the government and see how we could improve the service. Well, you can see the meeting didn't go as well as I thought. So we were shut down our first time, right? So bye-bye transportation, and we moved to deliveries. And at this time, I was thinking to myself, like, what's going on? Why we facing so many issues around this, right? And so I took some time to look at the landscape. We took a step back, right? Because when you're faced with a problem, sometimes diving into it is not going to help. So I had to take a step back. And what I found was that 1 out of 3 Filipino families own a motorcycle. 50% of them depend on it for livelihood, and 99% of them are from low-income households. But not only that, this was the image of, and the reality, to be fair, of what the regulators were thinking when they thought about our service, right? So basically, the first picture here is a Skylab. It's really Filipino ingenuity at its best because, the more people I can put on my bike, the less I can charge them, and it's a win-win situation for everyone because it's economies of scale. But this is not the safest way to ride a motorcycle. And so I would contend that the safety statistics that the government was using against us was really because of the way we were riding the motorcycle and not because of the motorcycle itself being dangerous, right? So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out the landscape, and finally we went to the courts to seek some help. And thankfully we were given an injunction, right? So we were allowed to operate again. And that was great for a couple of months. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court injunction, the government got an injunction as well, taking from our playbook. And we were shut down for our second time. And, this led to a unity ride where, people just came out to support the cause because, bikers are not criminals. Bikers are, hardworking people, and they just really want to make a living for themselves, right? And this opportunity is something that we really wanted to give to millions of the bikers out there. So this was an amazing show of support, and that was one of the many things that we did. But I think what really got through was us thinking about a more creative way to tell the Supreme Court that the statistics of 50% of all deaths come from motorcycles. That does not apply to Angkas because we take the time to train our bikers, which is something that low-income households have never had the opportunity to do, right? And as a result, with our system and platform in place, we're able to be safer than condoms. So I'm just going to share a quick video here for you to look at what we did. So we ran, oh, sorry. How do I get out of this? So we ran, hang on now. Okay, so we ran a really successful campaign. And just remember, 90 condoms are only 98% safe, not not as much as you think you would wish it was. So with that campaign, we were really able to put in something that was a really boring statistic and have it, be the battle cry of our bikers, our concert, and really our message to lawmakers and regulators, right? And actually we were able to get a pilot, which led us to restart again, which was really, really great, right? And then, so, this was pre-COVID, of course. And we thought, okay, you know what, now we've got a pilot, it's like, this is the way to legislation. And we were really, really excited. But unfortunately, COVID hit, right? This is our third shutdown. And this was something that was out of left field. I was ready for more government regulations and education and whatnot. But COVID was really something that hit us so hard because it was something that you can't argue with. It's something you can't see. And it was a really big blow at that time, right? So, after we took a deep breath, picked ourselves up, we decided to launch Padala Fresh, right? We also launched a new service called Pabili to help people, buy items from the stores because everyone was stuck at home. And we also realized that, we now have very strong players in this field. We have Grab Express, we have, Lala Move, and they were really the strong players in this space. So, we had to, be humble and admit it, right? And, I was telling my team, you know what, we may not be the best app for deliveries, but we have the most polite drivers, the most happy drivers. And this is something that, let's tell people about it because we have heart. We actually, during this time, what kept us going was, really figuring out, taking another step back, right? Figuring out who our stakeholders were, who the communities were that we were trying to help, and how can we do that? So during this time, we also removed commissions from our drivers because we wanted to help them get through this time, right? And then once we've done that, helping the different communities, we helped restaurants with food because suddenly they had no more customers. We decided, what's our next step? And the next step really was to, how do we bring back motorcycle taxis? We believe that motorcycle taxis with open air, and one-to-one service is one of the safest ways to get around. But we had to convince people around us. And we did this by partnering with IATF, College of UP of Public Health. We did a lot of intense R&D with also a safety firm in the US, and we came up with this design of the passenger shield, right? Because at that time it was the 1 meter distancing rule that was implemented. So this was something that could help in that sense, right? And it was adopted, it was accepted by IATF, and we're happy to say that this is something that led to the this is something that led us to be able to help the community again, because we gave that shield design to the public for free through all our R&D. But I think what was more important really was helping open up the economy, give people confidence to stay safe, right? With all the right protocols to stay safe, but at the same time, have confidence to get back out there, because the economy or people stuck at home, people will die of hunger, right? If the economy doesn't open, then we can't progress. So we also put in quite a significant effort to help with this campaign, which is called Ingat Angat. And I'll just share a quick video on that, because even though COVID's been around for a year, it's back again. So I'm hoping that this will help give us confidence to stay safe, but and yet be responsible.
Aangat tayo muli. Ito ang paniniwalang ating panghahawakan. Sa ngayon, at pagdududa ang pumipigil sa ating ibalik ang dating buhay. Pero aangat tayo muli dahil may isang bagay na hindi kayang kunin ng COVID sa atin. Ito ang ating pagiging matibay at determinado. Tayo ang lahing hindi natitinag ng bagyo, lindol, baha, at pagsabog ng bulkan. Paulit-ulit bumabangon. Ilang beses mong kulpihin sa ulan. Kaya, aangat tayo muli. Kakayanin natin muli ito. Sa palaging pagsuot ng mask at face shield, paghugas ng kamay, at pagpapanatili ng distansya. Hindi mo lang inaalagaan ang iyong sarili. Kung hindi, pati na rin ang mga nakapaligid sa'yo. Sundan natin ang mga ito at magkasamang salubungin ang sikat ng araw sa mga paborito nating lugar. Walang kasiguraduhan ang mga darating na araw. Ang sigurado lang ay kapag sinapuso natin ang pag-iingat, aangat tayo muli. Ingat-angat tayong lahat.
So this campaign was actually tremendous, right? It brought together enemies or brands that would never have been seen together with each other. But because of the spirit of hope and that we wanted to give back to the people, this was something that, just amazing, right? What COVID can do during these times to bring people together. Hang on. So, with this thought leadership and the efforts that we're putting in to help the government give confidence, reopen the economy, we were also able, thankfully, to bring back motorcycle taxis to the people, right? It's an affordable and safe mode of transportation. And today we've also been able to do a Red Cross partnership, right? So we've signed a MOA with Red Cross, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be helping to distribute saliva PCR tests and eventually also vaccinations so that it can reach even more people, because saliva PCR tests are more affordable, and it's something that we can bring to people in their homes, right? But these are just the many things that we've had to do through the times to change the way we think about our business, to change the way we think about our communities, right? Safety and professionalism has always been the heart of what we do. And, with all the crises that we've faced, we've always had to take a step back and reevaluate whether we're still focused on the core of what we're doing and how can we do it better. All right. So today we still continue this fight, and we hope to be able to turn this into this. So I think as an ending point, right? Leadership is never easy. We've seen that change through time. The kinds of things that we had to make decisions on, and also we had to reevaluate what's important to us and important to our stakeholders. And as long as we're able to continue doing that, we will find ways to persevere, right? So I hope this message goes up to everyone as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Angeline. Let's now call on Jocelyn. Yeah, our next presenter.
Hello, just making sure everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, first and foremost, I want to say good evening to the organizers, Phoenix, and the leaders who put this panel together for International Women's Month. I am truly honored to speak among Angeline Tham and Isabel Rivera. My name is Jocelyn Manalo, and to join all of you this evening, I know that all of you wanted me to touch on some of the challenges serving the Filipino community during COVID-19. Before I go on to some of the challenges, I wanted to give you some insight on my pathway to public service and my Filipino roots. I take great pride in being Filipino American. My mother and father came from the Philippines and moved to the United States when my mother, in honor of International Women's Month, she was only 24 years old when she landed foot in San Francisco, knew no family, and from there built a career in, she was in banking and then also in a nonprofit sector. And I share this story of my roots because I'm so proud of my Filipino heritage. And that is something I take with me. With Daly City being over 32% Filipino descent, it's extremely important to remember our cultural values when understanding and seeing our youth, young people, and seniors. I have my cat that always wants to also be part of the Filipino culture. Sorry about that. Many of my background has always been around hearing on the ground what's going on in regards to what's happening within the community. And like many of you in the business sector, it's important to get an analysis, a market check, and really have a pulse, right, on really what's happening on the ground. And so exactly 1 year ago, in the Bay Area, we actually moved into shelter in place. And a couple of days later, the whole state of California moved in the same direction. So I think for many of us, we wanted to continue to thrive through these changes. It was mentioned earlier, how do you pivot through these changes? We've seen so much more, and I think we've been given the opportunity to remind ourselves that we need to always be nimble and be able to shift through changes. I think many times, and I think the whole world, right? We've now, and this is a global panel, we've been able to see our world in a different light, where we had to take pauses, where our usual day of life, moving so fast, we all kind of had to have a pause in some moments and have that reflection. So, our routines were interrupted. Our children's routines were interrupted. Our families' routines were interrupted. But in that discourse, there's also a blessing, right? There was many moments where many children were at home being with family, and also being able to balance working from home and also having your children and helping them with schoolwork. But as a local legislator and leader in my community, even though there was this disruption, there was also an innovation towards how we conducted business through government. So our meetings, we never missed one meeting. I actually had more meetings, of course. They all moved to the platform we're utilizing now, Zoom, right? But the in-person, face-to-face, customer-facing departments moved into utilizing phone calls and emails. And, serving over 100,000 residents in my city, as mentioned, with over 32% of Filipinos descent, we saw right away that there was a rise of unemployment due to the pandemic. And a very stark issue that we saw right away was food insecurity. And many of you may even be like, in the United States, there was food insecurity. Yes, there was food insecurity due to unemployment. Please excuse me, I'm gonna put my cat down. And this is also how innovation and pivoting has to happen. I think it's not the usual, I'm able to work from home, right? And then with that, the blessing of working from home, but also being able to pivot when you have to. And so what we did do is partner with the local food bank. And what we saw with the rise of food insecurity is we partnered with the local and large businesses such as the malls, and that's where we distributed food to the community. Many of them just wanted to make sure they had a roof over their heads, and so food was an issue in that regard. And so we're able to locate and find 2 locations with that, really through a public-private partnership. Excuse me. I will say that my cat always likes to also join my city council meetings, and it never fails, because when I'm not on a Zoom or something live, this one always joins. I apologize for this. I'm so sorry. Okay. So I think one of the issues that we also saw, and we have a large Filipino community of nurses, and in that regard, it's been very saddening to see that many of our frontline workers were the ones that actually, were there for our communities, but many of them, and there's a statistic that I want to share with all of you, and maybe you've heard of it already, but for only 4% of the workforce being of Filipino descent, with the COVID cases that have happened, this was a statistic in fall of 2020, with over 32% had COVID-19 fatalities. And to those workers, thank you for your service. But this hits home, right? Because many of our workers are frontliners, and really, let me just, I'll speak to you guys all on my without my video right now. And that was something huge for our community, to make sure that they were safe. I mean, right away, when COVID hit, one of the the issues that we faced was actually around garnering PPE, right? Our local hospitals didn't have enough protection gear. So when you talk about collaboration and innovation, what it is that whatever we had as a local city government, we offered that to the hospital, and that's something that we did right away. Also, working with the local community organizations was something that we did. The Filipino American Democratic Club of San Mateo County, and also Filipino Bayanihan Resource Center. So when you talk about how do people come together when there are trials and when there is really something unforeseen. And what we saw was communities really working together, from folks that were at home cooking meals for others, and also the ability to fundraise and support the local restaurants that were unfortunately really on the tip of closing their businesses. So this was a collaboration that we did on Mother's Day. We had a huge Mother's Day feed for hot meals for those in the community. And then also did this once again during Father's Day, knowing and understanding that these are really kind of those moments for our community where they want to celebrate with their families, but if they don't have if they don't have the means, then it's unfortunate. But we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And when I say that, I'm going to move into kind of some of the issues that I've seen around vaccines. And I think, we are now rolling out our vaccines, and that's something extremely important for us to do. But I will say one challenge in there is actually getting our Filipino community vaccinated. I've heard from others that they're extremely afraid of the vaccine. They think that they're going to have a microchip in their arm. I mean, these are all those arenas where messaging is so important. So what we did is make sure that we continue through different avenues, if it's the newspaper, through culturally, linguistically appropriate language, and making sure that the message is there, and that people understand that vaccines are safe, and that we're not gonna move into herd immunity if we don't do our part. And so that's where we are right now, and really rolling out hyper local sites where people don't have to go far to get these vaccinations. I think that we were all blindsided by COVID-19, and it's really being able to move and continue the work for the community, even though you're not meeting in person. And I was really, really proud of the council and the staff that I worked with, because when we reflected back onto the work we did last year, we actually accomplished a lot. When you talk about pivoting, we had to move our senior meal programs and stop it. Right. But what happened is staff right away figured out a way to do congregate meals and drop them off to their homes. And the recreation programs that many of our youth utilize were, you couldn't meet or do their sports. And so what they did is they started volunteering and helping the seniors. So when you talk about that true Bayanihan spirit, that comes from our culture as Filipinos, it's there in Daly City, and that's what I'm really proud of, to see that through pivoting and really making sure that we still provide to our community members, whether it's the seniors or families. One thing I also wanted to share is also, we provided rental assistance to community members that needed the support. And that was something we knew was if they weren't able to pay for their rent, then we knew there was another issue down the pipeline. And so we made sure that we put more dollars into those programs. We continually, like on a weekly basis, myself as the mayor, provide public service announcements. As you all know, you've seen that change happens very quickly around vaccines, around the variants of the viruses. And so for me, it's important to share with our community on a weekly basis what opportunities are there to get vaccinated, what are the updates and resources that they are looking towards. So, at this moment, I'm happy to yield my time if I have time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Please stay for the Q&A and the Q&A after all the speakers have presented. So may I now call on our next one, Miss Isabel. Isabel?
Thank you so much, Attorney Benedicta. Share my screen. Oops, it's in a different mode. Hold on. Are you seeing it in the? Sorry, I'm seeing it in a different way.
Yes,
Okay.
you can see it. But it's not in.
It's not in full. Is it in full
screen? Yeah.
Is it in full screen? Sorry, you might have to. Would it be possible to upload it from your side, because it doesn't seem to be?
Okay.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. That's much better. So I want to say good morning, distinguished guests, fellow panelists, partners and friends. It's really an honor to join this morning's session, especially in celebrating National Women's Month. So I just want to say that if you could move to the next slide, please. UN Women in Asia Pacific has been working since the first week of the pandemic when it hit China last year to help identify and address the specific challenges faced by women and girls across the region. And so we knew from past disasters that women and girls are disproportionately impacted in terms of economic impacts, access to social protection, increased risks of violence, and heightened levels of discrimination. And so early on, we had initiated a multi-pronged approach. So that's building on existing knowledge, leveraging systems and programs, and also scaling up and pivoting our interventions to address COVID-19 impacts. And so the interventions are really supported to targeting the most affected women, including cash transfers, livelihood opportunities through PPE production, and support to pivot gender-based survivors services for them through shelters and hotlines to match the new realities of the lockdown. We have also used our expertise in gender analysis and statistics to provide data and knowledge products to inform preparedness, response, and building back better. So in terms of that, when in April 2020, so basically, 2019, 2 weeks after the 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic was declared, so we started rolling out these rapid assessment surveys to quickly capture its gendered consequences to, across the region. So these surveys were distributed among millions of people, and it illustrated that women and men are experiencing the effects of the pandemic differently. In subsequent slides, we'll see what those impacts are. And on the coordination side, UN Women made a direct contribution to the emergence of national gender and human action working groups and other coordinating mechanisms, as well as playing a key role in framing the UN country team's socioeconomic response plans and frameworks. Next slide, please. So this is a great slide to share in terms of the impacts and example of the rapid assessment surveys we had conducted. So in contrast with previous humanitarian crises, COVID-19 underscores unpaid care work as a key dimension of emergency response. So it's an enabler of both well-being and income generation, given the school closures, elder vulnerability, and work from home arrangements. So lockdowns are also multiplying, as we've seen, the domestic workload, which is another form of essential work, particularly since cleaning can prevent infection. So as a result, so many women and men worldwide have become naturally teachers, nurses, and cooks with a multiplied workload that cannot be outsourced without the risk of bringing infection into the home. So although men and women are shouldering some more of these time burdens together, 63% of women compared to 59% of men have seen increases in unpaid domestic work. And 60% of women and 54% of men saw them in unpaid care work increases since the spread of COVID-19. And this is on top of evidence already that in the Asia Pacific region, we know that women already are spending 4 times as much as men on unpaid care work. This is prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's really highlighting, the exacerbated impacts of unpaid care work. And so when we had run these data surveys, the findings that we had uncovered have informed governments and United Nations planning, such as in Bangladesh, where UN recommendations for the national 5-year plan included issues such as expanding social protection to remedy women's income losses from the increased burden of unpaid care work. Also, where there's continuous innovation in countries like Indonesia to partner with a tech company in combining big data analytics and cost-effective data collection and analysis technologies. So the aim of these are to really provide more precise measurements of COVID-19 impacts on women micro-entrepreneurs. So if we go to the next slide, please. So we know that COVID-19 is rapidly turning into a profound economic crisis that's affecting people's livelihoods and participation in the labor market. So in the Asia Pacific region alone, where most of the working population is engaged in informal employment, vulnerability is further exacerbated by the lack of social protection. So an estimated 83% of people who lost their jobs or did not work do not receive unemployment benefits or other forms of government support. In the case of women, this figure stands at 84%. And since the pandemic began, a larger share of women, roughly 50% compared to 35% of men, in formal employment has seen their paid hours reduced. And almost in most countries, it is women overall who are also noting the largest drops of income from paid jobs, regardless of whether they're engaged in formal or informal employment. So these job and income losses are occurring in labor markets that are already segregated along gender lines, where women usually already earn less than their partners. Go to the next slide, please. So these are examples from the region where effective responses to COVID-19 need to fully integrate gender through explicit strategies that uphold the rights of women and girls and meet their distinct needs. So UN Women has been the leading regional and global champion for gender responsive planning, both within international and humanitarian communities. And this is done through strong partnerships with national governments and CSOs. So we're trying to really make sure and embed gender in response plans. So that means strengthening the quality of plans through data and training, and then also defining the priorities for women and girls in the longer term recovery stage. And this also means when we work with our other UN sister agencies, and it's really deepening our engagement with them. And UN Women has been very active in UN country teams in development of socioeconomic response plans and frameworks. So in addition to what you're seeing here on the slide, what we're also doing, especially if you look at what's happening in the Philippines, is really working with leaders to define the legislative priorities and to also make sure that there's a focus on addressing the needs of the most vulnerable and impacted groups of women, such as migrant workers that have often been forced to return to their home communities as a result of travel restrictions or job losses. I want to note here, obviously, there's a heightening and situation in Myanmar. And so we're working very closely within the UN country teams to really monitor that situation and ensure that we have an appropriate response. So if we go to the next slide, please. So these are just some examples, I think, visually to show our work in the ground. If you look at the right-hand side with the woman in the red dress in the flag, that's featuring a photo of our work in Fiji with some market vendors during COVID-19. We also have seen that in places like Indonesia, we have worked through the Safe and Fair program for PPE kits distribution. So that's really important in terms of ensuring that we provide the essential services, especially as gender-based violence is on the rise. And then we also have a photo there of the women in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, where we brought together different journalists, change agents, and some women from local women's rights and equality groups to promote media engagement, really in terms of making sure that there's gender responsive reporting as we work with the media in how they portray and address gender-based violence in the media. And then also we have another one where it's handing over the mic to men and women on the front lines and making sure that the voices of survivors, essential workers, and leaders are making sure that they're prominent, telling what's urgent and how we can recover and build from COVID-19. The next slide, please. So we've been really well placed to adapting our existing work and strengthening national systems and services. And we know that many of these programs in the region already straddle development and humanitarian work, given the region's ongoing vulnerability to disasters. And I'm sure you're probably more well-versed than I am on how the disasters impact in the Philippines. And so we build on these global best practices and innovations and trying to enlist both religious and sports organizations to champion a stop to the gender-based violence that's escalating. And then with every country in the region without facing some level of crisis from the pandemic, UN Women is assisting governments and national women's machineries to coordinate national response plans to meet the minimum standards for preventing and responding to gender-based violence in emergencies. And so an example of that, for example, in Timor-Leste, we joined with the other UN agency partners to extend support services to those in quarantine facilities. We also have done some work with quarantine centers in Vietnam, Cambodia, Nepal, Pakistan. And then we have also tried to address the and life-saving shelters that are in place in countries like Afghanistan, Indonesia, Pakistan, PNG. And so we've done this through the use of technology such as WhatsApp chatbots and apps in countries like India. And so we're trying to really find innovative ways to reach vulnerable people through more mobile and online counseling services. And so there's been lots of also multiple communications materials and campaigns that have urged the prevention of violence as this has been really brought to the forefront with this ongoing pandemic. If we go to the next slide, please. So, across the region, we are leveraging our civil society partnerships to increase their influence on COVID-19 responses. So in Nepal, we provided civil society platform for diverse groups to share their issues and concerns to develop partners in UN agencies. And in Bangladesh, we're convening a gender monitoring network of women-led and gender equality-focused civil society organizations, including those that represent sex workers, women with disabilities, and including those that are organizing around transgender women. So these issues that were raised in these consultations are now being presented as inputs into country response plans. When we look at countries like the Philippines, we're really trying to move further on the women, peace, and security agenda, which is quite a big issue, particularly in countries. We're trying to make sure that we're addressing both emerging issues and recurring issues on WPS, such as climate security, cybersecurity. So what we're trying to really focus on there is emphasizing women in leadership as part of the overarching women, peace, and security agenda. Right, and so the next slide, please. Right. So one of the ways that we must accelerate gender equality and women's empowerment in the community, in our communities, is by bringing the private sector into the agenda as effective agents of change. So one of the disruptive effects of the pandemic we've already touched upon is, especially on women's economic empowerment, not only includes the surge in unpaid care and domestic work for women and girls, but it's also the restricted access to resources that can affect their livelihoods. So women's overrepresentation in industries that have been severely impacted by the crisis, such as tourism, garment, and informers, have led to reduced hours, reduced pay, and also a harrowing prospect that many may not be able to return to work after the crisis. So many women who are working in the informal economy with little or no social protection are finding their situation is particularly dire and becoming even more so in lower income countries. And so in this pandemic, when it seems like there is no light at the end of the tunnel and it's brought us to a crossroads, either we continue with business as usual, and in that case, we face the risk of sending gender equality back decades, or we can push forward to include a gender lens in our COVID-19 recovery to build back in a more fair and inclusive way. So the private sector has a huge role to play in designing the next normal to help demolish the barriers of gender equality, inequality. And so companies have the responsibility to promote more gender inclusive workplaces, whether in the office or at home, by providing a safe space for all employees to address the challenges they face. And the private sector should, as much as possible, move to allow for more flexible working hours, paid leave, and work from home facilities, accounting for the care responsibilities that many women bear. They should also ensure that workers, including caregivers, are provided the adequate equipment to protect themselves when at work. So one of the bright sides that we've seen in this era where working from home has become our normal is that stakeholders from the business world have been responding to this need. So we've never seen so many companies signing up to what we call the Women's Empowerment Principles, or WEPs, in the Asia Pacific region. So last year, we welcomed more than 300 newly joined WEP signatories, so making it a total of 900 signatories registered in the Asia Pacific regions. The hope this year is that we'll be able to increase that even more. And one of the ways that the private sector's propensity for technological innovation can contribute to the recovery in the pandemic while promoting both gender equality and human rights is to apply principles of big data and artificial intelligence where appropriate. So this could come from identifying which form of healthcare or other public services are overloaded, tracking and countering the spread of misogyny, xenophobia, and disinformation, and measuring the impacts of the crisis on vulnerable populations. And that's really showing us where the help is most needed. It's also crucial for organizations to take steps to bring more women into senior leadership roles. So I'm really feeling very privileged to have known that we have so many women leaders as part of the Women in Finance community, as part of Finex. So it's really, I think, a great testament to showing that diversity is very much needed in leadership. And it's not only good for business, but it's also ensuring that companies are responsive to the needs of their female employees, as well as the communities they work within. So I wanted to just briefly touch upon the key initiatives directly linked to the work that we're doing in the Philippines with UN Women. So UN Women has its new program in the Philippines where we empower Asia, which is focused on women's economic empowerment, and it's engaging and collaborating with private sector groups. And that's promoting and facilitating gender equality and women's empowerment through the signing of WEPs. Another way is that companies and private sector groups are also enjoined to proactively participate in key campaigns like promoting safe spaces in the workplace, especially during the 16 days of activism that's launched every 25th of November and culminates on the 10th of December on International Human Rights Day. And private sector groups can also contribute and support outreach work of UN Women through donating cash or in-kind and humanitarian work that provides assistance to women in most need in select communities, like what we did for the communities in San Mateo and Navotas. So as you've heard this morning, in our work towards moving the needle to a more gender equal world, UN Women has rallied with partners in both public and private sectors to amplify the call for women's participation, more women's participation and leadership in all decision-making regarding economic recovery measures. And so for economic stimulus measures to be successful, they must do more than just assist major corporations, but also reach workers and the small and medium-sized businesses that are the engines of the region's economy and which are disproportionately harmed by women in many sectors. So now is the time to ensure that gender equality is fully entrenched in our long-term recovery and to build a more sustainable and equitable and resilient societies that will need to emerge from this crisis. So thank you so much to Finex, especially the Finance Committee, for inviting me here today. And I stop here for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Isabel. I am really so impressed with these young ladies. The line of work that they're doing now is something I think, I don't know, for my age, it's something that is difficult to see myself to be in those situations and line of jobs when I was that age. Now, so we will know more about them as we go into this open forum. May I now call on our moderator, Ms. Malu Cristobal. Malu is the chair of Multinational Bank Corporation, and she is our favorite moderator and MC in Women in Finance. Malu, please.
Thank you, Dick, and good morning to everybody. It's such a pleasure and a great privilege to be in a conversation with three very accomplished young women. There's a saying that was attributed to the first woman president in Africa. Her name's Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and she said, "If your dreams do not scare you, then your dreams are not big enough." And it just makes me realize how scary the dreams of our speakers must have been for them to have accomplished so much at this relatively young age. Our topic is global leadership at its best, or as Dick said, global women leadership at its best. So let me home in on leadership issues. And I'd like to address this question to the three speakers. Does gender matter in leadership, in politics, in entrepreneurship and business, in an international organization like the United Nations? And did your gender affect your rise to your leadership, to your current leadership positions? Let's start with Jocelyn, then Angeline, and then Isabel.
Thank you for
Short
that question.
Sweet.
Okay, sure. I definitely think that. I mean, there's different types of leaderships, right? And I think being a woman leader, I have a lens that is much different. I think, and I think it's being able to see things in different perspectives. and look at kind of everything in a more kind of comprehensive approach, and a holistic manner. And I think, not saying men don't do that, I don't, but I do see that in moments of decision making, there's really kind of that viewpoint in that regard. Will I say me as a woman helped me be in this role? I don't think so. I had to break that ceiling to be here. But as mentioned before, like I'm here to raise the next woman up, right? Next Asian Pacific Islander woman, or any or Filipino woman. So I'm not the first only, but that
Thank
there's
you, Angeline.
more coming.
Sorry.
Coming forth. Mhm.
Angeline, you're on mute.
Hi. Thanks, Malu, for the question. And I totally agree with Jocelyn, right? I think being a women leader, I feel that gives me more breadth in the way I look at things. As I say, so agree, not saying that men don't do it, but I feel like I mother my bikers,
You're more nurturing.
Yes, so I've been able to take care of them in a way that maybe I worry about, do they have enough to eat? We take care of them in different ways, and that's why we've also been able to build that community to be very strong, right? That group of people.
Angeline, can I
Yeah.
just interrupt, because you
Sure.
talked about nurturing, and
Yes.
I'm wondering whether it could be a perception of you being soft.
So I think
when viewed from that lens.
So I think it depends, right, on how it's viewed, right? So sometimes I think it could be considered in that sense, if sometimes when I think about all the different aspects, and it takes longer to make a decision, right? Because it's not just about dollars and cents, right? It's also about, this is the most economical way to do it. But if I take these other three things into consideration, then what is the final decision that comes out? So I think it takes a longer time to reach a decision, maybe. But I mean, I think ultimately, that's the best way to go about it, versus just looking at hard facts, right? And to the question about whether gender matters, I think I've been fortunate enough to grow up in a country where gender isn't too much of a difference I feel, at least, right? And I'm very fortunate for that. And I think a lot of people ask me, you're in a man's world, right? A majority of your bikers are men. So I think that's one question: how many females bikers we have? We have about 10% of our bikers are female. And what is it like in that world? And for me, it's the way you view yourself, right? But I mean, also, I can't get chummy with my bikers the way maybe a guy can. But then it's about being aware of the differences, and how do you choose? Maybe my number two is a guy, so I leave certain things for him to do, and I do different things. So it's how do you read the whole situation, right? Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, and Isabel?
Right, so I'll answer this in two ways. One, I do believe that gender does indeed matter. We see that especially in political context, where if you look at conflict settings where there's women are involved, like women in a leadership role are involved, you see a much more peaceful response and resolution than you may normally have seen if it were a man. And I think that I echo the other panelists in that even if we're here in the roles, and I'm sure that many of the women in the women in finance community can also share the same sentiment, that we have had the privilege to be in these leadership roles, but it definitely probably has, for many of us, been a journey, right? In terms of really fighting to break that glass ceiling that Mayor Jocelyn had mentioned. And so I think that we as women leaders are in the position to be able to then make that there shouldn't be a ceiling for the generations that come after us. So I think that we need to take that as our what we would like to take forward. I think in making sure that we do have a more gender equal world.
The next generation of women leaders standing on your shoulders, and hopefully being able to have an environment that would be less more hospitable, more conducive to their rise
Yes.
up the organization. Let me go back to Jesslyn. You know, there's so much noise in politics, a lot of competing voices, and I guess so much machismo. And was there ever a time when you were hesitant to speak up, when you doubted your voice? And if so, how did you learn to trust your own voice and to use it?
I think in the political realm, because I lead with conviction and my heart in the community, I've never felt in a place where my voice is stifled because I'm speaking for others, right? And so I think one thing I am learning to do is to do that for myself, right? Like I'm a great advocate for my community, but if it comes down to kind of kind of my role in the corporate world I'm in my different job, it's a little different. And so I said, why do I compartmentalize that, right? When I'm speaking for the people and my community, I will be bold and be there. So I think I'm learning those dynamics and understanding why in those different spheres, and I'm being very candid where there's that hesitation. And if I do look at it, it's probably an assessment of I'm in a leadership role here, and then there's tiers of elevation, right, within kind of the corporate work I do, right? So there is that dynamic, and it's really interesting because I've seen that, but no, there's a moment actually I'll share that I went to this one convention. It's actually a women's event. It was a women's event, and this one assembly member went up to me and said, "Oh, you're a mayor." He's like, "Aren't you too young to be a mayor?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" I was like, "This is a women's event. You just said that out loud."
Yes.
And so I in that moment I confronted him. Like I said, "Well, I'm like, is that a compliment or like what was he trying to say out of that? Being in a kind of a space where it was a women's event." So he kind of joked to his colleague and said, "Oh, well, how big is your population?" He goes, "Oh, she has a bigger population than you when you're mayor." Like, it kind of went in that direction. But it was like, why do you still feel a sense of being it was condescending to me. So I had to be forthright and really nip it at the head.
And just very briefly, there are a lot of reports about hate crimes victimizing and involving Asian Americans, and some reports even talked about the Filipinos in the U.S. having been, victims of these hate crimes. How are you using your voice to stand against and address what may be a looming racism problem in the U.S. again?
So right away, in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a statement that was released, and I brought it forth to the council that we needed to pass a resolution to state that we do not, stand for any type of hate towards Asian Americans and the rise of it. And continuously after that, we did a campaign around businesses to say, like, look, we, Daly City stands united against hate. So there's visually something out there. So we did that as well. But as a leader, like I just posted today, like, this is unacceptable. We have to unite. There was something in the chat that was mentioned, what are the traits that you have that you value as a Filipino or a Filipino American that you learned from your family? And I said, kapwa, right? Kapwa is like beautiful. Like I learned that, that genuine care to give back and forth. But one I think that value is the hiya. The hiya is like, I think it can transcend in a way where it's like, okay, you don't want to speak up. You're too shameful. And I think that's something that I think can be detrimental if we take that value forward. So
let me shift to Angeline. A lot of people have bright ideas, but they never get past it. And I want to just talk about your entrepreneurial journey from the light bulb moment to when the company went into commercial operation. Let's not talk about the regulatory problems after the business had gone, truly big and already making a lot of noise in the transportation industry, but really just getting it up and running. And I'm curious to know what the critical points were, and if you may use the pregnancy analogy, from the time of conception to delivery, and what would have been the most difficult part in the journey?
From until we launched. So actually, so I think a lot of times when you think about entrepreneurial journey, that there's just it's a so traffic was definitely something that was a big problem, right? And coming from Singapore, the quality of life of people, right? Accepting 2 to 3 hours of commute one way, and it was so acceptable, right? And people coming to meetings with me always late, and this was a way of life, right? And it was mind-boggling for me, right? And my husband always says, life is about problem solving, right? So this really was a problem that we were trying to solve, right? Which is, how do you get people safely from one place to another? And that really kind of like began that. And I did have some experience previously as well, with Grab, right? So that also helped.
Yeah,
but then,
yeah.
That step-by-step process, which was like, how do you go from conceptualization to doing it? It was just one step ahead of each. If you've ever climbed a mountain, right? If hiking, mountain climbing, you look at the peak and it's like, oh my gosh, it's really far away.
Yes, yes.
But then, if you look ahead of you and just take one step at a time, eventually you get there and you're like, wow, I don't know how I did that, right? And for us, really, it was, the goal is really to help people to get through traffic. That was the only goal. We didn't know the regulatory problems that we would face. We didn't know how popular it would get. And actually, when we first started, one of the biggest challenges that we had was that nobody wanted to ride a motorcycle because it was badui, right? And when we had customers who were riding and loved the service, they're riding us like 2 times a day, and we would call them and say, hey, we realize you really like Angkas. Would you tell your friends about it, post it on social media so we can get some, good feedback generating? And they'd be like, I'm sorry, I love you guys, but I can't put it on social media because my friends would scold me. My grandmother would nag at me, like, what are you doing? I actually get stopped, 2 houses away from where I live, so nobody sees me on a bike.
Would you say that bias was the most difficult part in getting the business up and running?
Yes. So when I started the business, I didn't know the stigma and discrimination against two-wheel motorcycle drivers, which is why when we got shut down, I was so surprised because I was like, what's going on here, right? So that bias was really, really strong. In this country, there are 18 million motorcycles, right, versus 4 or 5 million cars. In Metro Manila, you can't tell because of just the sheer number of cars in traffic, but we actually have an equal amount of cars and motorcycles in Metro Manila, but there's no infrastructure to give these motorcycle bikers any training. There's only one school in the entire country, right? So, the reason why people are riding like that, it's a no-brainer. So we have to have more infrastructure in place, and that's what we're doing, working with the government right now. Yeah.
Let me thank you, Angeline. Let me go to Isabel. Isabel, earlier you mentioned the glass ceiling, and that invisible barrier that tends to impede a lot of women in their rise up the organizational hierarchy. But of late, there seems to be an emerging phenomenon, and I think there have been some studies in the US that relate to what they like to call the glass cliff, where based on certain studies, that women are likelier than men to be given leadership posts, to precarious leadership positions in poorly performing companies where the chance of failure is highest. And the sense is that this is, in fact, gender discrimination. You being, like with an international organization based in the US, and really promoting gender equality and women empowerment. Can I have your thoughts on this?
I'm just going to repeat the question because there was a bit of a moment where it lagged. So you're saying that there's studies that talk about the glass cliff. So women, instead being not having access to leadership positions, instead they're offered leadership positions, but ones where they're set to fail, right?
Yes.
Essentially, yes.
Yes.
So I mean, I guess in terms of that, what I think would be probably something concrete that we're doing here in the region, and the headquarters of UN Women is in New York, as you know, but I'm based out of Bangkok, is that we're actually working with companies in terms of bringing together their programs in terms of how do they work with mentoring. And how do they also then build their talent management or leadership pipeline in terms of how are they grooming their next generation of leaders? And I guess within that, one of the other concrete things I think that people can do is, yes, maybe there may be more female representation in C-suite positions, but where it's lacking is in the board. Right? So in the boards of many of these companies. And so I think that's where then maybe we could look at how are we sort of looking at the selection process in terms of leadership, and where it's almost, in some cases, I'm not saying it is in all, but there's that token leadership where you give a female leader a rising corporate leader a position, but in reality,
you're token Asian, you're token
exactly
Black.
But where they need to be, where women also really need to be, is behind the scenes, because we know that many of the decisions are made by the board, right? And so I think that that's where the push can be, and to see some of those changes where then it isn't a glass ceiling or a glass cliff that they're now having to sort of tackle and try to overcome, but more having the support of a board that's really vested in true leadership and true leadership of senior leaders in the companies.
You mentioned support, and I'd like to pick up that term because you belong to a huge organization where the chance to be visible, to be noticed, and to stand out can be much more difficult, I guess, than working in a smaller pond. And one of the ways that women can rise up the organization is if they create their own support network. I'm curious to know whether you had one, how you built it, and how that support network has helped you.
Sure, then that's a great question, actually, Marilu, because again, I think that, I've been quite lucky in the sense that I was offered the opportunity, actually, when I was based in Geneva. They had done a pilot of essentially leaders within the UN system, so different female leaders across 11 UN agencies, and then they were essentially hand selected. So your head of office then nominated you to join this group, and where that would then create this support system where you would have other female leaders that were trying to also, in essence, being groomed for the next generation of leadership within the UN system, but also have access to strong female leaders within the UN system itself. And I think what I learned from that is really the power of how, as a collective, as a group of women, that we need to not only, support each other within these specific groups, but also when there aren't other women around the table. And so I think that that's something that really resonated from my participation in the group. And I would say that was probably one of the key drivers, I would say, in helping me in this journey. And aside from that, having obviously also, I think, great mentors also really helps. And I think a large part is having the right manager to support you in your leadership journey, because that's also who will be able to open up the doors for you as well as other existing networks.
Let me ask the three of you ladies. One of the things that they say some of us women, a lot of women leaders confront is what they call the imposter syndrome. That feeling of being a phony, that sense believing that, you're not really as smart or as competent as other people perceive you to be. Have you ever experienced that? And if you did, how did you rise above it? Have you ever felt that imposter syndrome? No? Good for you then. Let's move.
I mean, I like to address that, right? So I think,
Okay.
I mean, imposter syndrome, sometimes, you do doubt yourself, especially during the down times when you're flying high, you have no reason to doubt like that you're awesome. But, when as with life, there's always ups and downs. And during the down times, I have to say that there are times where, I do ask myself, am I the right person for this? Or am I leading the company in a way that I would like to be, right? And I think, and sometimes I think you can feel imposter syndrome without even asking yourself these questions, and just by retreating and not really engaging, right? And it takes a lot of self-awareness, all people around you to point it out for you to kind of like, whoa, wake up and get back in there, right? So I think, yes, there is sometimes where you doubt yourself, and there are times where I unconsciously doubt myself, right? And I'm very fortunate to have my husband as well to always be there to like poke me, right? So I think that's one of the benefits of working with your spouse. Although it does cause conflict.
I can imagine that. Yes.
so I think it's just always good to, take time to reflect. So I've started meditating recently. Yeah. So as I said during my presentation, it helps a lot of times to step back and just really look at the big picture. Breath. Right, take a deep breath. So I've started meditating this year. I mean, I love listening to a lot of podcasts, and a lot of people that I admire talk about how meditation is so good for you, and I decided to start trying. And I haven't gotten very far, but I have to say that it's given me more clarity and also more peace, right, from the stressful world that we live in, especially when you can't control a lot of things around you. So yeah.
Thank you. I need to run through the questions in our Q&A box because we do have very, very limited time. Some of these questions have already been addressed in one form or another. So let me just pick the issues that I think will need to be brought to light. Here's one question for Isabel. What can we, women from the private sector with limited reach, funding and influence, help curb GBV, gender-based violence, I guess? Isabel?
I think that actually women in the private sector, and especially many of the women probably joining on this call, don't have limited reach. You're in positions where you're the decision makers. And so I think that when we look at how you can support and stem the increasing gender-based violence, it's not just also about the financial resources, but also maybe looking at how are you then instituting or ensuring that there are safe spaces for the women or vulnerable groups in the companies that you're working for, right? Because sometimes that there's not necessarily that space where people can, what people aren't aware of is actually there's a lot of gender-based violence, sexual harassment, etc., taking place in the workplace. And a lot of people are very afraid to come out and talk about it. And so one of the ways that you can actually do that is naturally to work with us, because we do have programs where we work with companies to be able to try to look at ways that we can create those safe environments and spaces where people are not afraid to come out, and also to use your leadership role. So maybe you may not see this as having necessarily the whole financial reach in itself, but if you're in a senior executive position in finance. I mean, this is very much a key position that you can use within your leadership team to lobby and to be able to advocate for more gender-based, safe workplaces, and how can you then change your policies and practices so they're taking into account some of the harmful situations that maybe some of your employees may find themselves in.
Okay, thank you. This one for Angeline. How does ANCAS ensure that female riders are safe and free from possible harassment or abuse by riders? I guess this is a concern that a lot of female riders may be facing.
Yeah, so I mean, we conduct a lot of training with our bikers, right? So I think sometimes a friendly comment can be misconstrued as something
Yes.
creepy, right? So this is something that we try to emphasize in our customer service training with our bikers. We've also done I think workplace training on harassment, right? So I think it's about education, right? And it's about having open lines of channels. So if ever we get complaints, we take it very seriously. We bring the bikers in, we counsel them. If it's something gross, then they get then they get banned from the platform. So there are
Do you
ways of
suspend drivers?
we suspend
if
or
they're
ban
making
drivers.
complaints?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, depending on the degree and whether So there is an investigation that a team takes care of, and there's always hotlines open 24/7. So all of these things are addressed promptly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And this is for Jesslyn. What advice would you give to the next generation of female leaders? I would imagine this would be more specific to women leaders in the area of public service or politics.
Sure. I think advice I would give to any females or women that wants to go into public service is to not be afraid to move into and step into those roles. We need more women leaders that are impacting policies. And if, we need you in those seats because you have that perspective and are going to be able to be an advocate for many others. So don't be afraid to take that leap. I was just speaking to someone earlier today who's Asian Pacific American woman that is really deciding on running or not, right? And she's like, it's a very scary feeling. But what I tell her is, trust it once you make the decision, go full force. I'm here to support, right? Because
yes.
and we need more. There is an imbalance, and I'm sure Isabel has the statistics on that just worldwide, and even I see it in kind of the local arena that I see. Right, that there still needs to be more women. And it's like what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, right? Well, when there's all 9, right? And when there's all 9, that's when we've reached equality. No one had an issue when it was all 9 men in the past, right? So
I've exceeded the time allotted for us, so let me just wrap up by and ask my one final question, short and sweet. There was one congresswoman in the US back in the 60s who said that every leader is a single sentence. By this, she meant that, a leader should have one driving passion, a singular agenda, that when her time is done, he can be remembered for that singular achievement. So let me ask Jesslyn and Angeline and Isabel, what is your single sentence? Jesslyn, what's your single sentence as a politician, a person in public service? Angeline as an entrepreneur and business person, and Isabel as a woman's advocate.
So I think my job will be done, or I will be able to look back, and when I see a more empowered community, and that there is a pipeline behind me.
Okay, thank you, Angeline.
I think in terms of what we're doing now, right? My single sentence would be that we're able to change the mindsets and make the lives better of the people around us. Yeah,
By using motorcycles.
and using motorcycles. Yes.
And Isabel?
I guess for me, it would be that we would be able to wake up one day where we aren't defined by by the gender sort of definitions that that restrict us, whether we're women or men, and that really that we can achieve real social norms change and making sure that the behaviors of all people in all ages really are truly inclusive.
Okay, thank you. We have to wrap up. Let me now call on another woman leader who can do 1001 things and do them all exceptionally well. Let me call back Dick.
Thank you, Malu. Thank you, ladies. You are all doing good in your own respective fields. You are great. With that, may I call now our president, Francis Lim, to do the awarding of the certificates and closing remarks. Attorney Lim.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's now do the certificate. And I read it for our audience and our participants. The Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines presents the Certificate of Appreciation to Ms. Angeline Tam, Honorable Justin Manalo, and Ms. Isabel Rivera in recognition of their generosity in sharing their time, knowledge, and insights as resource speakers during the Women in Finance Committee webinar entitled Global Leadership at its Best, given this 80th day of March 2021 via Zoom. Thank you very much, Mayor Jocelyn, Mayor Angeline, and Isabel for taking time for us. Okay, for my closing remarks, distinguished speakers, fellow PDEX members and guests, good morning to one and all. Truly, the pandemic has compelled us to reshape and hone our skills to help our respective companies and organizations address its devastating effects. It has given our women a distinct opportunity to show that the stuff that they're really made of. Certainly, they have not failed us. In fact, they have shown us the way. The likes of the world's women leaders from Iceland to Taiwan, from Germany to New Zealand, from Iceland to Denmark, and our speakers today are a testament to this truth. Thank you, Mayor Jocelyn. Thank you, Angeline, and thank you, Isabel, for sharing your knowledge, experiences, and insights about various aspects of leadership. The different perspectives that you imparted to us are very invaluable. We in Phoenix are indeed lucky that you are sharing this with us during this Women's Month, which makes it especially meaningful to us. I would like to thank Malu Cristobal for once again ably steering and making interactive and interesting the discussion. Congratulations to the Women in Finance Committee led by its chair, Terry Magleo, and Liaison Director Titi Silveta for this successful webinar. Thank you to all our participants. We hope to see you in our future webinars and upcoming PDEX events. Maraming salamat at mabuhay ang PDEX.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you all for attending our events. I now close the session. Thank you.
Hi, Angeline, Francis. Angeline.
Thank you. Hi.
Yeah. Congrats to George for
Oh,
the
thank you,
POYM.
sir. Thank
I
you.
was one of the board members of the board of judges.
Oh, wow. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Really
your
appreciate the support.
your advocacy, what you did for the tricycle was really the thing that, yeah, it was a very close, tough team, no, that we had to decide on.
We're
Yeah.
still fighting, unfortunately.
Yeah. I know,
But thank you
we
so
know
much.
that there were frustrations at the start, but I think we're there. Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you, Angeline. Give my regards to
Thank
George.
I will do. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Attorney. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank you so much for the invite, guys. This was great. Happy
Thank you.
Women's Month, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Mayor.
much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Justin.
Mayor.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.